as being followed. For example, ISO 13485 is a standard which is required for a medical device to sell products in India and outside India. So that is like a very minimum. So you will have to follow certain kind of protocols for certain kind of standards when you are started commercializing your product, and it is important to have standards in place. So when you are ready to manufacture, so like you're commercializing the product, say the clinical trials is over, so you will have to get a manufacturing license. So manufacturing licenses are typically not done in India for most of the small low risk devices, but when you go for large production kind of or devices which are basically a therapeutic devices, a device which is basically used outside India, so you will have to get a license to manufacture. And that is given by the state government or the central government based on the risk of the device. So if it is a class A, so you will be applying for form MD3 for license and getting it from CDSCO from MD5. So since it is class A, no audit is required because it is basically a low risk device. So class B will have a lot of scrutiny because it is much more high risk than class A, and you would basically get it in from the central licensing authority 45 days, and all the quality management required audit would be there. So for this also there is MD3 which is available in CDSCO portal. You would want to check that while you are applying for a manufacturing license. So for class C it is MD7. That is the form that you will have to basically apply for getting class C products manufacturing license. And class, yes, these are CDS. And you will have to pay like for clinical investigation it is 1 lakh that you will have to pay for doing any kind of investigation like randomized control trial or pivotal studies. So it is starting with 1 lakh that you will have to prove something. So for example, we went to CDSCO and we have asked like we have this product and how to go about it. Most of the times it's not clear in India exactly the regulatory pathway. So a lot of these companies, big companies as well as the smaller companies, they write to the CDSCO body and they'll ask what is the regulatory pathway. So after this 2017 medical device rules, they have come up with some kind of a format. So they are saying that you will have to prove certain kind of you are claiming this, what is your intended use? If your intended use is somewhere between similar to predicate devices, you could basically do a performance study. You could basically do some kind of investigation study and prove that. So performance studies, if you have a predicate device, if you are making a same device, but it is much more, you are claiming that it is much more efficient, it is much more effective and much more cost effective, but you will have to basically compare the existing device and then say that the performance of this device is similar to that device or better than. So that you will have to prove it by performance study. And a lot of these CRO companies like clinical research organizations, they do this and they have certain protocols, and you could meet some consultants to do these performance studies, because only then you will get an acceptance of CDSCO to get your product approved. So if the device that you're developing is like a totally innovative product, which is not available in the market, which is totally different, they would ask you to do a clinical investigation study, which basically is like you are investigating the device safetiness, device effectiveness, and device performance. So there are two things. So that's something you need to keep in mind.
For that is payment of 1 lakh.
Yeah.
That's the fees to CDSCO.
That is a fees to CDSCO. Yeah. That is a fees to CDSCO to get application process, so that they would call for example, we are working on respiratory, so they would call a pulmonary experts from around India, and they would arrange a committee, and you will have to come and present to the committee, and then they would tell you what is the pathway that you would have to go, whether you have to change your protocol that you have done, or you are approved to do a clinical trial, because they are basically that is nothing for them. They are basically setting up a committee, a set of very skilled doctors who are experts in that area. If you are making something, CDSCO is just a body, but they don't have the expertise to exactly do that. So they would hire, basically they would set up a committee to evaluate the proposal. So yeah, test license is basically if you are working on some diagnostic devices, so you will have to get some test license to manufacture for doing initial tests. It could be a preclinical test or clinical test. So when you are going for a clinical investigation, you would be basically going for MD22. So Form MD22 is something that you'll have to apply. That's where you get you'll have to pay a fee of 1 lakh. And if it is, since you are academics, I don't think you would, if you're doing purely academic, not related to any commercialization, I think people do start with academic and they get some enough evidence saying that, okay, I am making something, a non-invasive diagnostic kit, and I have done some academic studies in some hospitals that only requires ethics approval, doesn't require CDSU approval. Then you could go ahead with investigation study. So, but that would also be much more cost. So predicate devices, if you find that your device is similar to other devices, you could basically come under the category of predicate devices where it would have same intended use and the technological characters or different, characteristics, but it is, at the end of the day, it is doing the same thing. So these are the requirements for clinical investigation. You will have to register for clinical trials, IEC approval. And these are some of the fees that you would be paying for manufacturing license. If it is a clinical investigation, like I said, it is 1 lakh. Permission to conduct pilot clinical investigation, 1 lakh. And pivotal. And these are some of the forms. So clinical validation, you would look at prototype, you test the prototype, and you do clinical validation, and you go to physicians and you get the case report, and you would basically get all the data that, like, is it patients, patients, what is the clinical outcomes that they are measuring, and you would do a data analysis, and you would fine tune your prototype if there is something that is not working out, and then you would go for a clinical test license for clinical investigation. So this clinical validation stages. So this would be a clinical investigation or performance for a IVD. IVD is in vitro diagnostic devices. And this is the portal for CDS. What are the existing notified devices are available in CDSCO portal. So this is the things that you need to know. What are the devices falls under Class A, Class B, Class C. So you are aware that whatever the product that you are looking to develop, which whether it falls, whether if at all it falls under any particular class, what class is it, what risk it is. Most of the times it might not fit into, if you are working on some monitoring device, it might not fall under any specific class because there are no such devices, classes which are notified. Yeah. So far, any questions like grant writing or anything related to regulatory?
This class ABCD is the equivalent of class 1, 2A, 2B, 3.
Which one?
Class ABCD.
Yeah. Class A is the low risk. Class B.
This one is the Indian classification.
This is Indian. Yeah.
In US they have 1, 2A, 2B.
They have only 3. Yeah, they have only 3. Europe and India has 4. US has only 3. Yeah.
And 2 also they make this distinction, 2A and
2B. That is Europe. Yeah. So I have recently been to Europe and Berlin, where some of the latest technologies that they have been working on, and I wanted to give a perspective of what are the technologies which are there in Europe and what we can, what it makes sense for us to adopt some of them for the needs we are solving. So some of the innovative health systems, it has future patient room, digital health. So they are more focusing in Europe, they are more focusing on the digital health, the digital connectivity, telemedicine aspect, robotic surgeries, augmented reality, virtual reality. So and how you could reduce the shortage of staff through digitalization of care, and how you could use these technologies basically. So telemedicine is one of the areas where you could have a large disparities, people inaccessible for healthcare, and you could basically build some technologies which are basically driven by IoT, driven by AI algorithms and machine learning, and how you could make a telemedicine platform for connecting healthcare, be it a physician, tele ICU to a village, or bringing some kind of a monitoring system to a village which connects to big hospitals in cities. So what some of the things that they are doing is using the existing technologies like networking solutions, and how they are integrating those solutions with the devices that they have, be it mobile phone or be it any other devices. How they could take a sensor data, your patient data, and you could send it to mobile, and that could go to cloud, and that could send data to a physician who is far away in a city. So you could use all these digital networking technologies, like using the telemedicine softwares, and you could integrate them with any automated systems for monitoring. So what happens most of the times when doctors are busy with looking at patients, they want a lot of these things to be automated. So a lot of doctors' procedures, they want it automated. So there is a huge potential for automation in healthcare, in terms of using AI, in terms of using big data, in terms of using IoT. How you could automate the doctors' processes within hospitals can be much more applied if you start relating these technologies for everyday doctors' work, and how it affects patients over a period of time. So that is something that the state of the art, which is happening in Europe, in US, yeah. And it also helps in clinical decision support. So you could basically make some, IBM Watson is an example. So they have a huge database of, which gives recommendations for a doctor to make some decisions. So that kind of gives a edge when you're using AI and you're using some kind of some special algorithms, which basically supports doctors' efforts in treating patients. So these are some of the future developments which is happening in healthcare and technology. Some of them would be to how you can make some of these processes much more efficient, effective. So one of the example that I would say is that an app which was built by some entrepreneur who was just from college, which would basically automate staff nurses' work, and it would basically communicate within hospital, and it was more of a chat and networking, but it was the way you implement it, the way it is organized, the way it is used can make a lot of difference. And these are some of the digital technologies. So the first one would be AI, how you can use AI to use automation in patients' data. So both can significantly support physicians in analyzing clinical data. Say for example, you have 10,000 images of retinal scans or images of cornea scans, and you could basically work on some an algorithm which basically can be compatible with any of the existing devices, and they could your your customer can be these manufacturers who could basically, you could license this technology to them, and they could make, you could make a business model around it. So optimizing doctors' time is something very important, and how, because the disparities between doctors and patients are so high that there is a need for automation, so it can reduce the time that each doctor can spend with one patient, so it much more makes it more efficient and effective when treating patients. So this is something like, you're talking about patients, wearables, so it could be something that it is a rehabilitation device where the patient is interacting with some kind of a device, and the device is basically getting some patterns of how the patient, who is a rehab patient, is interacting with the device, and it takes those motions into consideration and gives certain outputs. So it could be wearables, and how you could send these data, sleep monitoring, and all these specific aspects to cloud and use it for analyzing. Yeah. Any question? So wearables, pretty much wearables combined with AI has a huge potential. One of the examples is a wearable which I was talking about is a company which is working on monitoring neonatal distress levels, and this can be used for hospitals across the wards. So it gets all the patients' data, and it sends the data to cloud, and it basically analyzes the patterns. If there is some kind of if the child is having some kind of a respiratory distress or some kind of a hypothermia, it monitors the temperature of the body and all these things, and it would give an alert if something is happening, even if some kind of things at early stage. So in addition to the existing wearables and AI, VR and AR, if you look at the opportunities for solving a lot of the problems can be addressed if you have some kind of a training tool. So one of the things that if you go to any hospital, they would say the instruments are not the problem, the manpower is the problem, and the problem is also the trained manpower. So VR and AR can be something that training can be done, simulation can be done, because robotic surgeries can be done in a simulated environment, and you can have some kind of develop some application which basically allows a surgeon or a doctor to practice in that simulated environment. And VR and AR are some of those things. And you would need a lot of this software like Unity to practice some of these models, 3D models, and test it out. Yeah, so virtual reality and augmented reality, surgeons can practice before going for an operation. And IoT is basically you are sending the data to cloud, and you are sending alerts when it is required. So you'll have to clearly define what are the parameters that you are monitoring continuously, whether it is heart rate, or is it blood pressure, or is it going to be certain kind of a criteria, or if that is the parameters that you're looking at, if the values, if you are monitoring them real time, if the values go above or below certain value, you'll have to inform the concerned person. So if you look at existing hospitals, most of them are, they are taking the readings in paper and pen. So all these things can be digitalized. All these things can be automated if you have a good software that, that can be adopted by hospitals. Patient management software. And one of the other important things is 3D printing. So 3D printing, it can be used in implants. It can be used, a lot of this breakthrough kind of technology, advances have come from 3D printing, because you would find a lot of these trauma cases, mass casualties, and so there are some irreversible injuries to patients, and that leads to mortality and morbidity, and some of them needs artificial limbs and prosthetics. All these things are possible using 3D printing, and 3D printing has it has to also have some kind of a safety. So a lot of this things has to be regulated. It's already regulated. So you'll have to have biocompatibility tests and everything for this. So these are some of the 3D printing. You could see these are the valves. Like heart, a lot of things are 3D printed. Even tissue printing. So there is a company which raised some $20 million, Pandorum Technologies. So they have raised literally like $20-30 million in India, in Bangalore, because they are the first company in India working tissue printing. So it is basically, they are printing cornea, they are printing this liver, they are printing liver. But the challenge is that once you print these tissues, it has to be compatible with the existing, the patients, whomever you're going to treat with. So what they do is they take the patient's sample in terms of their cells and they try to grow them. So 3D printing is also applicable in this tissue manufacturing. And yeah, 3D printing is used in this prosthetics and implants. Yeah, so if you could use, this is the example I was talking about yesterday. So you could use an existing AI system to automate certain imaging for X-ray. But if fundamentally, if the imaging is done for a specific period of time, if the X-ray is going to take a lot of time, so it is going to be an inefficient process. So you will have to make something that is going to solve the problem in the both sides of the the spectrum of the issue. So this is basically, we're talking about how you could use of technology in an efficient process increases efficiency. Use of technology in an inefficient process increases inefficiency. So here we have a case study, like it is an artificial scenario where a patient has a condition called tachyarrhythmia. It is a heart disorder, and he has a specific a telemedicine platform, and he has a wearable. So this is a European scenario where he is basically getting an alert beforehand, and the alert is saying that your heart rhythms are not is not proper. You will have to go to a doctor, and he's not able to find that symptoms before, because the algorithm is so smart, it has given a very early prediction, and he's going to a doctor beforehand and he's getting treated, so that there is a early intervention happening, and early intervention can save lives and will save lives. So as long as we have false positives and false negatives decreased, and we are using the right intervention, and most of the times early diagnostics, early screening will change the way how healthcare is perceived for general public. So he's basically getting the data. He's basically getting every day's his vitals, and it is being trained, and it is compared with this existing other people's data, and it is checking based on his lifestyle, and it is checking whether the patterns are proper. If the patterns are not proper, and he's already a heart patient, and it is going to basically inform the doctor. It is going to basically inform him to go to a doctor, and he's getting treated. And this is an example how the future is going to be in healthcare. So it is much more advanced, connected, faster.
Yeah, the alert might give another decade.
Yeah. So since it is data-driven decision making, so the doctor, the insurance company might pay for it. In India, there is not much insurance companies-driven healthcare system. So I think that is where there is a lot of potential in terms of connecting medical devices, health insurance, and that is the whole ecosystem. We need a change in India. Yeah. So these are some of the future hospital scenarios would look like: telesurgery, augmented reality based surgeries, applied research in medical robotics, minimally invasive interventions, patient safety and clinical risk management. So some of the things which are already there is, been to Boston. So one company is working on augmented reality based remote surgery. So a doctor can be in Bangalore, and he could be doing surgery in Syria for patients. So through telemedicine, through augmented reality, through this. Any questions? So yeah, I'll be talking about this tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
So tomorrow, what time?